So we have saved level 6.6 for the end, which is kind of fun because now we get to incorporate two other things. So not just finding the amplitude and the period, but we're also going to be talking about things related to the phase shift, so shifting it left to right, and a vertical shift, so moving it up and down. So when I'm saying all of these things, and I'm going to translate what this means below, is amplitude is going to be our A value. Our phase shift, so the symbol that is often used is phi for phase shift. So if you ever see me write this, that's what that means. And it will always be negative C over B if this is our formula. Because if C is negative, that means we shift to the right. So if then shift right. If positive C, then shift left. Okay, so that's just like we had a number on the inside, shifts it to the right if it's negative, if it's positive, it shifts to the left. Our vertical shift is just our D value. So that's pretty easy, and we saw that with one example on 6.5 with tangents. So this is just D. Positive D up, negative down. Just like we have before, we're just going to be shifting these graphs up, down, left, and right. And I'm requiring you to do this by hand, but then later on we can use a graphing calculator. Okay, so what I've been doing all this time is giving you a step-by-step way of graphing these. I'm just going to add a couple more right here. So we're going to start by finding the amplitude and the period. Then we're going to figure out the phase shift. Our phase shift tells us where to start. And that's the big thing about the phase shift. It's going to tell us where does our graph start. And then from there, we're going to determine the endpoint by adding finish is phase shift plus period. So if you add the phase shift and the period, you get the endpoints. Once we get that, then we're just going to get our 4 intervals in between. So we'll cut it in half, then cut it in half again, and then add those two together. And then once we get that, we graph our one cycle. So let's try this out. So as usual, amplitude is 3. Our period for sine is 2 pi over b. So this is 2 pi over 2, which is just pi, if we simplify it. Our phase shift, or phi, is negative c, I'll write it, negative c over b. So negative pi over b. So our phase shift is pi over 2. So we start at our phase shift. We finish at pi over 2 plus pi, which is 3 pi over 2. So we've just moved and sped up our graphing procedure. We have everything now that we need because there's no vertical shift, which is nice. Okay. So we go to our start, which is pi over 2. We go to our finish, which is 3 pi over 2, because we calculated that. So how do you find the halfway point between these? Well, how do you find the average between two things? Add them up, divide by 2. So pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2 is 4 pi over 2, or 2 pi. Cut it in half. we get pi. Let's make sure that that is halfway. So we get pi. Okay, I want to find the average between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Sorry, pi over 2 and pi. We can look on our unit circle and see that halfway between those would be 3 pi over 4. And we could look here, halfway between pi and 3 pi over 2 is 5 pi over 4. Or you can, again, add these two up, divide by 2. You get the exact same thing. Okay, now that we have all of these, and just again, phase shift plus period. Cut it in half, or add these two, divide by 2. Cut it in half, or add these two, divide by 2. Cut it in half. That's what we get all of these points. Now we're just going to put our sign values on here. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So in purple, sign is 0, then it's up, then it's 0, then it's down, then it's back to 0. So this is our sine graph shifted pi over 2. Now, if we continued this on, and some of you guys would ask, well, isn't this just a negative cosine graph? Yeah, it's a negative cosine graph shifted. So let's flip it over, try a couple more of these. All right, so at the last page of level 6, starting with example 2. Let's see if we can get this procedure down. Amplitude, 3. Our period is 2 pi over b, so 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2. Our phase shift, which is negative c over b, or negative pi over 4. So our starting place would be negative pi over 4. Our finish is negative pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is positive pi over 4. We do have a vertical shift of plus 1. So I'll show you how we're going to deal with that in just a second. So with our graph, we're going to go to our starting spot, negative pi over 4. We're going to go to our finish spot, positive pi over 4. We're going to cut this in half, or add these two together, which is 0, divide by 2, which is 0. Halfway between negative pi over 4 and 0, negative pi over 8. Halfway between 0 and pi over 4, pi over 8. And then our amplitude is 3, 2, 3. Okay, so if we had everything here and we're graphing a cosine, so we should start up at 3. So normally we would be at here, 3, then 0, here, here. So this is what our normal points would be. But because we have our vertical shift, I'm going to add 1, or move each one of these up 1 place. So we would, instead of being at 3, would be at 4. Instead of being at 0, we'd be at 1. Instead of being at negative 3, we'd be at negative 2. Instead of being at 0, we're going to be at 1. And instead of being at 3, we're going to be at 4. So our cosine graph that got shifted all around is going to look like this. So instead of it being on the x-axis nicely, we had it shifted up, and because it's shifted up, we get our curve like this. Example 3. So amplitude is 2, and I'm just going to say it's flipped, so I remember. Our period, 2 pi over b, so 2 pi over pi. So our period is 2. Okay, that's interesting. Our phase shift is negative c over b. So our phase shift is negative 2 over pi, which is approximately negative 2/3, just for us to make it easier. Our start is going to be at our phase shift, so negative 2 over pi, or approximately negative 2/3. And our finish is negative 2 over pi plus 2 pi. Sorry, over plus 2. So 2 1/3, which is 7/3. So we're going to say this is equivalent to about 7/3. And we do have a vertical shift of, or down 5. So I'm going to start and then move everything down 5, because I think that's the easiest way to go. So I go to my starting spot. So we're going to call this negative 2/3. And I'll go to my finish spot, which is 7/3. We're going to add these two together, divide by 2. So add these two together, you get 5/3. Divide by 2, you get 5/6. So halfway is 5/6. Halfway between here and here, again, add these two together. So this is negative 4/3 plus negative 4/6 plus 5/6 is 1/6. Half of that would be 1/12. And again here, this is 14/3. So 5 plus 14/6. It would be 19/6, or halfway would be 19/12. So these numbers aren't pretty. And then on top of that, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So normally, since this is sine, we would be 0, then down 2, then 0, then up 2. Oh, sorry. 0, then here, then here, then here, then here. Ignore that spot. But all of these points are shifted down 5. So instead of being at 0, we're going to be at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is our new origin. This point right here is shifted down 5. So 1, 3, 4, 5. This point here would be back here. At 19/6, it would be here. And at 17/3, we'd be back here. So with my flipped, shifted down sine graph with a little bit out of scale, it looks something like this. This is our vertical shift, which causes everything to move down, and then our phase shift. So not to end on one super sloppy, let's see if we can get this down. So amplitude is 2. Our period is 2 pi over 2, or just pi. Our phase shift is negative c over b, or pi over 4. So that means we start at pi over 4. We finish at pi plus pi over 4. So that is 5 pi over 4. which is something we can easily do. We know vertical shift, which is nice. So we start at pi over 4. We finish at 5 pi over 4. Halfway between these two, add them up. This is 6 pi over 4. Divide by 2, which is 3 pi over 4. Halfway between pi over 4 and 3 pi over 4, pi over 2. Halfway between 3 pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4, pi. And our amplitude is up and down 2. And cosine, we start at the highest or lowest point. So we're going to start at -2. So here we start at -2, then we go down, then we go back up, and we walk our way back down. So our curve, since it's not shifted at all, for cosine is this upside down wave. And this is 1 repetition. So this is going to take a little while. We're going to spend at least 1 extra day just on graphing the vertical shifts and the phase shifts, and then we should have a test coming up. All right, good luck.